on Zoom. And from there, I am also going to share my screen. That way we can get rolling and everything. So again, there were a few things we didn't have a chance to chat about last time. Specifically, you may have noticed there was a lab activity to add some camera fly-throughs to some of your previous homework assignments. I've bumped that down to today because, of course, what I want to talk about today is those camera fly-throughs. So we'll have an opportunity for that. I also, again, not to jinx anything, but I don't anticipate today's class period taking the full hour and 15 minutes. So there might actually be an opportunity to begin this little lab activity in person as opposed to strictly outside of class. The other thing I want to do, and I'll kind of kick things off with this right now, that way I know we have enough time to do it, is I want to introduce our first major project that we'll be working on over the semester. As you'll recall, there's going to be 3 major projects that we do. One roughly every month or so, every like 5 weeks. And this will be our first one. Everything that we've been doing up until this point has been practice to prepare us for this first project. We've gained what I would consider to be a strong proficiency with sort of an introductory understanding of Blender, 3D modeling, crafting objects, both using and leveraging primitives as is, or beginning to form and mold and shape our own custom objects that could then be compiled together to build more complicated 3D models. So the first project is posted. You'll find it down at the bottom of today. Major Project 1, Journeyscapes, as it is. Forgive me, I sometimes come up with cheesy names. So we can jump in, we can take a look at things. The idea behind this first project is going to be similar to some of our smaller assignments that we've done over the last couple of weeks, but at sort of a larger scale and with more of a cohesive concept that unites it all together. So for this project, what you'll be asked to do is create several 3D scenes related to a fictional television show, movie, video game, book, whatever. Basically choose a fictional story that resonates with you, whatever your favorite stuff is out there, and build. What you'll be doing is you'll be building 3 3D scenes for whatever that fictional setting happens to be. And particularly what you'll be asked to do is create a scene from the beginning of that fictional story, create a scene from somewhere around the middle of that fictional story, and then create another 3D scene for something at the end of that story. So you'll choose whatever your favorite fictional story is, or one that you think has promise, and you build 3 scenes, beginning, middle, and end, plus or minus a little bit. Like, it doesn't need to be the very first shot from that movie or the very first chapter from that book, but something significant, roughly in the first third of the story, something from somewhere in the middle third, and somewhere in the final third of that story. And you'll create those 3D scenes. Generally speaking, the style and the aesthetic that you should be going for will be generally considered to be low poly in its design, which means that it's not hyper detailed or hyper realistic or anything. It has kind of a geometric and sort of angular shape to it, which is perfect because that's kind of where we are right now with our modeling capabilities. So generally consider this to be a low poly design as something more complicated than that. In terms of coloring, certainly you should include materials, and I would generally say that we should stick with solid color materials that we've been using so far. But of course, you are welcome to include image-based textures and materials if you want to, and if you feel as though it matches that design. Other things, when we're considering this, like obviously we're choosing a fictional story, and we're modeling several scenes from it. But I wouldn't necessarily call this like a character animation project. You can include some characters. They'll probably be fairly stylistic and caricaturized and whatnot. But primarily, this is about the scenes and the settings as opposed to the characters. So don't get mired down in trying to like 3D model this, perfectly accurate version of some character from some book that you've read. If you do include characters at all, I would say they should be fairly cartoony and fairly simplified in their overall aesthetic. In terms of the models, I mean, yes, we are going with a low poly design, but I do certainly expect there to be a significant amount of time and effort and detail poured into them. And again, I feel as though many of our previous lab assignments have certainly achieved this already. So I don't really have any doubts in anyone's ability, but again, these should be fairly detailed. Let's see, what else do we have in here? We're going to talk about 3D camera fly-throughs today. Fly-through, I'll fix that later. We're going to talk about 3D fly-throughs. And so for each one of your scenes that you build, after you craft it, what you'll need to do is you'll have some virtual cameras in that scene, and you'll fly through it and sort of focus on different areas. Like maybe you'll do like a wide shot and then another shot that kind of pans across a certain building or something at a closer angle. And so basically each of your 3 scenes will have a small camera fly through to allow us to sort of see your scene from multiple angles. I would say that each of these fly throughs should be roughly 15 seconds in length, which the math on that's pretty easy. It means that each of your 3 cameras will be looking at something for about 5 seconds. So you'll have 5 seconds on camera 1, 5 seconds on camera 2, 5 seconds on camera 3. So your first scene will have a 15-second fly through. And then of course, because you're also building 3 different scenes, that means in total, you'll have about 45 seconds worth of camera fly through for this project rendered out. Hopefully the math on that makes sense. And I could discuss it further if anyone needs. Of course, when this is done, when you have those camera fly-throughs and when you're finished in Blender, you'll need to make sure that your content is rendered out in video format, which we'll also talk about today. It's pretty easy and straightforward, but yes, you'll want your videos, or you want your project rendered as a video. You'll of course want to make sure it's uploaded online, posted to your design blog, everything like that. If you want to, because you would have 3 separate little camera fly-throughs, you could, if you want, compile them together into sort of one continuous video. You could use like Premiere or iMovie or something like that to do that if you want, or they could just be 3 separate video files. I would say if you're going to include audio for this project, it needs to be copyright free. I know the temptation would, potentially be like, oh, well, I'm just, I'm doing 3 different 3D scenes from, whatever, Harry Potter, right? And so I was going to take the Harry Potter theme song and just tack that into my videos, call it done. But of course, the problem with that is if we try to upload that to YouTube, YouTube is going to just automatically detect the copyrighted audio in there, flag your video, pull it down, and then it's a big hassle. So to avoid that, use copyright-free audio for this project as you layer that in with your video. I could also talk about this in greater detail in a little while, but YouTube has a great copyright-free audio resource that anyone can pull from. If you were just to Google simply the term YouTube audio library, it's probably going to be that top hit in there. Yep, absolutely. So YouTube audio library, just Google it, search it up, click into it. You do need to be logged into your YouTube account to access anything in there. And of course, as we probably know by now, your CU Google Drive / Gmail account does not work with YouTube. So it has to be a non-CU account that you're logged into. But if you jump in there, basically, I guess I'll do it real fast. I'm not signed in though, but so if we jump in, non-Colorado account, jump into YouTube's audio library, it'll bring you in, choose whatever account you have, and then it'll just bring you to a big list of MP3 files, right? You can filter things by mood if you want to, or by category if need be. But generally speaking, it gives us a wide array of different tracks. I didn't share my computer audio in Zoom, so if I played any of these, I don't think they would come through. But you can see that for each one of these, you can play it, you can sample it, figure out if it's something that you like, and then sort of if you like it, hit the download button right next to it, and then you have copyright-free audio that you could include in any video-based content that you build. So this is definitely a resource that could work well for this class, and I would wager that it's also a resource that would be useful for many other classes that you're taking as well. So just remember that when you're putting the finishing touches on this project, you've got your 3 separate renderings in video format, and you're like stitching them together into one final piece, consider throwing in just like a soundtrack on top of it to kind of complete the sensory experience for the project. Jumping back over to the assignment on Canvas, I have a couple of examples of low poly movie scenes just kind of posted down below, or most of them are movies anyway. Like, so obviously the first one is Tatooine from Star Wars, the first Star Wars, or I guess they technically go back to that planet several times, but it's Tatooine, right? We've got like the moisture condenser, whatever the heck that thing's called, on Luke's farm, and there's the building back there, the two suns on the planet. Like, we can tell that's obviously Tatooine. Like, if you're a Star Wars fan, you're like, oh yeah, I know that. Scrolling down a little bit further is, a scene constructed from the movie Jaws, right? So they crafted the boat. They do have characters in there, but again, you can see that those characters are pretty simplistic in their models, right? You can tell that they're basically just geometric forms. There's nothing hyper detailed about them. Perhaps the colors of their clothing, hair, and skin are enough of an indication to represent who those characters are, even if there aren't really any facial details to make out. The shark is a shark, and yes, it's kind of simplified in its design, but you can clearly still tell it is a shark. Scrolling down a little bit further, a shot from Harry Potter, right? The train, flying cars, little forest in the distance. I love the forest because it's really just a bunch of simplified spheres that are all sort of clustered together with either box or cylindrical geometric shapes kind of stuck into them to make tree trunks. So it's a very simple design, but when it's all brought together, it looks amazing, right? Like this is absolutely a scene from Harry Potter, but again, without looking photorealistic, right? So within our realm of achievement, sort of where we are with things. And then the last one is sort of like a low poly. This one's kind of like our assignment maybe from last week. It's like a little condensed version of a piece of Springfield from The Simpsons, right? Like, we got like Moe's Tavern, the Aztec Theater, and I guess Disco Stew's Disco Place or whatever. It's been a long time since I've watched The Simpsons, but we can tell again that this is The Simpsons, and it is a little sort of scene or snapshot from that city. So again, the idea: choose one of your favorite fictions, regardless of genre, and you'll model a scene from the beginning, middle, and end of it. Camera fly-throughs to get a good sense of those shots, compile it together as a video. Let me pull up the chat real quick, just in case. But either in person or on Zoom, does anybody have any questions in terms of what this project is, or generally speaking, where we're going to go with it? Cool. No one in person. I know it takes a little while to type in a question in chat, so we'll give you a moment if you're doing that. So the plan is going to be, of course, I want to talk about a few more things today, but starting this weekend, we're going to start to plan this project. And as we move into next week in class, I don't have any lessons planned. The purpose, the intent of next week in class, both Tuesday and Thursday, is going to be to dedicate those 2 class periods as work sessions to develop this project. It, of course, won't be enough, but it'll certainly be enough that you can get a good head start on things. It's also a time where, of course, I'm here to answer questions. So if you're like, hey, my model broke, or what do you think about my idea? Like, what should I do about this? Or how do you propose I build some object or building within my scene? Those are the things that we can talk about during class. So it'll be like glorified office hours, which again, I also have on Wednesdays if you have questions in between our class periods. But next week in class is going to be dedicated to a work week for this project. And then we'll have the following weekend after that to put finishing touches on things, spattered with little chunks of work time here or there outside of class, typical homework kind of stuff. And what we'll do is we will circle back around on, I know I have it on the thing, but we're going to circle back around on Tuesday the 22nd, and then we'll do an in-class critique for this project. So that's kind of what we're going to be looking at over the next roughly 2 weeks in class. Again, this is one of those things that what I think and what ends up happening could be very different. But right now, I'll dedicate Tuesday the 22nd as our critique day for this project. But we do have, a 20-person class. And we only meet for an hour and 15 minutes. So, and I want critique to be good. Like I want us to actually talk about and discuss these projects, things that work well, and maybe aspects of a project that could be improved upon. If it turns out that we get through everybody in one day, so be it, that's fine. But I'm also, keeping in the back of my mind the fact that critiques may end up being like a full week type of thing where, everyone's here both days and we're looking at everyone's projects, but like half the class goes on Tuesday and then the other half of the class goes on Thursday. And that'll be completely regardless of whether you're an in-person student or a remote student. It'll just be like, all right, well, here's who's presenting Tuesday, here's who's presenting Thursday. And it'll sort of be like a mix of in-person and remote students both of those days. Cool. Don't see any questions in chat, but that doesn't mean you can't continue to offer them up. If anyone has any questions on this project over the next couple of days, as you're starting to think about it, please feel free to let me know. And as we move into this weekend, like I mentioned a moment ago, there is a homework assignment that I would like everyone to complete related to this project. And that's obviously posted here under homework, the class Canvas page. And this is something that you need to do in addition to the assignment. So yes, you have to do the project, but I want you to start doing some other things as well. Over the weekend, what I'd like you to do is not only choose the story that you plan on representing through your 3D modeling, but also think about, particularly within that fictional story, what 3 scenes you're going to be representing. So that should be sort of a no-brainer. I would say, again, I want you to challenge yourself. I want this to be rigorous and whatnot, but I want you to also be sort of realistic in scope as well. So I'm trying to think of like a 3D scene that's like hyper complicated. So like in the movie Coco, right? Like there's the afterlife. And, it's like this huge illuminated space with like lanterns everywhere. And it's like this city built up on top of multiple layers and everything. Let's try to find a picture of that. Coco afterlife. Right? Like that's a teeny tiny picture. Let's see. Like this right here, like this is the afterlife from Coco. I don't expect anyone to do this, right? Like this was produced probably over a series of months by professional 3D animators and modelers, right? So we do have to keep this reasonable in scope. So when you're thinking about your fictitious story, and you're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna choose Coco, and for the middle of the story, it's gonna be this scene. Like, we'll have to scale that back a little bit. You can certainly still do Coco, but what I would probably do at that point is choose a scene from the middle of the story where it's not some grandiose undead metropolis in the afterlife kind of a thing, right? And the same goes for a lot of stories, right? Like for the Star Wars example I showed a moment ago, there are definitely some complicated scenes within Star Wars movies, advanced cities and everything like that. But there are also sort of more simplistic scenes that you can choose from as well. Not simple for the sake of easiness, but simple to keep this project within scope and within our skill set. So that's kind of what I want us to be mindful of. Over the weekend, again, choose that story, choose those scenes, and then I want everyone to develop a series of concept works that help us move towards what this final project will be. First thing I'd like you to do as you're compiling your concept work is take some screenshots. Like if it's from a movie, take some screenshots of those scenes. That way we have them as a visual reference for what you plan on doing. If it's from a book, obviously that's a little bit more challenging, right? But I'm sure there might be like some fan art online or something like that of those scenes, or the general area of the story where that's taking place. If it's from a video game, same thing. Like jump on YouTube, find like a let's play of that game, and just like take a couple of screenshots from those areas of the game. Same with TV shows too. So take some screenshots of the actual content as best as you can. And then any other maybe imagery that you find online that's sort of inspirational. Like, oh, I love the 3D style of this, right? So maybe include some of those inspirational images as well if you find any. I would like everyone to do some hand-drawn sketches of how you think those scenes are going to look. Now, mind you, the hand-drawn sketches that I've done down here are all pretty advanced. And so this isn't necessarily the level of drawing that I expect everyone to have done over the weekend. But again, doing some SketchUps or doing some sketches of generally like, okay, well, I'm going to have this building here, and like a little road that goes across right there. Those are easily things that we can all draw and craft, even if the style isn't, as good as some of these, really, really beautiful drawings. If you've got that ability, great. I encourage you to leverage that. But I'd wager to say that each of these drawings alone is, numerous hours, probably 5 to 10 hours each. This one, maybe not quite as much, but, certainly this middle one and this top one are hours and hours and hours of work just on concepting. So we strike a balance, as always. But I would like to see a sketch for each of those 3D scenes and kind of where you plan on going with it over the weekend. And then lastly, this could be fairly short, although I did not include a length on it. We'll say a couple of paragraphs. I'd like everyone to do just a brief write-up in text in terms of what you plan on doing. So for my Journey Escapes project, I am going to be 3D modeling 3 scenes from the fictional story X. Scene 1 is going to be blah, scene 2 is going to be this, and scene 3 is going to be that. I plan on including these types of buildings because they're significant in the story. Like, you're basically just giving us a conversational, text-based, overarching explanation into what you plan on doing for this project. That's kind of the nutshell of this this concepting project. Source screenshots, inspirations, a couple of sketches, and a brief little write-up. This small assignment is expected to be completed by the time we start class on Tuesday of next week. That way, when we arrive in class, we're not really thinking about what we might be doing for our project. We can come to class knowing what we're going to do for this project. You'll know specifically, all right, well, I've got to make scene 1, and scene 1 is this, and I've sketched it out already, so time to get cracking. That's the notion of what we'll be doing over the next while.
I have a question.
Matt, do you have a question? Yeah, what's up?
Yeah. So can this be from like any sort of media, or is it only movies?
Yeah. So the question, I got a question. Could it be from any sort of media or just movies? It could be from any medium. So again, it could be movies, TV shows, books. It could be video games, whatever. It's all fair game to me.
Cool. I'm also wondering if we have to use Blender or can we use Cinema 4D?
That's a good question. I mean, ultimately, the medium doesn't matter, right? Like in terms of how you create a project. I would say that probably for most of us, like, we're doing Blender. So probably Blender. And I would say it probably will encourage you to push your skills. But if you already have a strong proficiency with Cinema 4D, I'm not going to stop you from doing that. Maybe you model a few things in Cinema 4D and import them into Blender, or vice versa. I'll leave that up to you. But I'd say, like, for the most part, Blender is the platform that we'll be using for the semester.
All right, thank you.
You wouldn't lose any points, though, if you did something different.
All right,
yeah. Any other questions on this weekend's homework assignment? Yes. Like your screenshots and stuff? Yep. Yeah, all of the, well, so the 3 scenes should definitely all be from one story. So like, just going back to Star Wars, right? Like, it should be probably like Tatooine, the Death Star, and then like Yavin, I think is the name of the planet that they're on at the end. So like, they're all 3 scenes are from one story. But in terms of like where you grab like your inspirational photos and your screenshots and stuff like that, like those could all come from wherever, like wherever you find them is fine. But yeah, these 3 scenes should definitely all be from one particular story. Yeah. Yeah, I'd say, I mean, like, as a general description, I'll say one from approximately the first third to the second third in the third of the film. But technically, like, I mean, I'm not gonna like check for timestamps or whatever, but like you could choose something towards the end of the middle and the beginning of the end, then they're fairly close together. But it shouldn't be like three things all from the first half hour of the movie kind of a thing. Yeah, definitely flexible on all of that, because different movies tell stories in different ways, and the story isn't always evenly distributed, and sometimes it makes sense to have things that are iconic for the story, but they're not like perfectly spaced out. Also, because there might be a scene that you're really interested in, and feel like you have a strong ability to emulate that. But maybe it's not perfectly at one of those milestone points. So short answer is I'm definitely flexible with that. Generally chronological and approximately first, second, and third of the movie, plus or minus a little bit. Great questions, both in person and on Zoom, so thank you for those. Anything else that people are thinking about right now on this project, or questions you may have before we, I guess, start working on it to a degree?
I actually have one more question.
Yeah, what's up?
In the scene, you want us to do a camera fly through. Is the camera the only thing that's gonna have to be animated?
Yeah, great question. For those in person, I found some speakers. I just didn't plug them in today. For those in person, the question was, the camera needs to be animated, but does anything else within the scene need to be animated? I guess I probably should have put that in the description. I would say maybe like there should be some subtle, maybe scene animations, like maybe there's like a little tree that sways a bit, or maybe there's a light that kind of flickers a little bit or something like that. You don't need to have like people out on the street dancing or anything, but if there's a few things that kind of make sense, then go for it, right? Like maybe there's like a windmill or something. That'd be a pretty easy thing to like animate, just kind of rotating around or something. So if there are some subtle things that could just kind of go back and forth or spin around a little bit or move up and down, those would be some good things to include. But again, I'm not expecting tons of people running around. I'm not expecting like complex machinery or anything like that. These would be very subtle things that maybe just help add to the overall ambience of the scene. So it's a great question. Cool. So what I'd like to do next is jump back into Blender for just a few moments. Obviously, since a big aspect of this project is these fly-throughs, I want to talk about those real quick. The good news is building a fly-through isn't terribly difficult, and it kind of relies upon those same principles that we started to look at last time in class related to animation, right? And hopefully we discovered basic animation to be fairly straightforward. The idea being we position an object where we want to, and then we add a keyframe, and then we go a little bit further on our timeline, and then just move that object and apply another keyframe. And then Blender should take care of the rest for us. So I'm gonna make my timeline just a little bit bigger. It doesn't need to be too much. And what I want to do is create a small fly through just with what we have here. Or maybe what I'll do is I'll take this cube and I'll add an array modifier on it, just so that we have maybe several cubes instead of just one. All right, so nothing too crazy. Or again, copy paste cubes, whatever you want to do. But like, I've got some stuff to fly past whatever, right? Like obviously, if we were building a scene, it would take quite a while. So this is kind of a way for us to represent that and talk about the new concept that we need to without getting too terribly sidetracked building like a full-blown city or anything like that. Cool. So obviously, we know how to navigate our scene. Of course, we know at this point in time that we have a camera in our scene. And that this camera is what renders our project. We can always go back up to camera mode up in the right-hand corner, and that zeroes us in on what the camera sees and what ultimately is going to be rendered from our shot, right? So it's important to remember that. What I want to do is I want to be able to kind of move through and work with this camera. So for me, and I've said this before, but something that I really enjoy about the camera is making sure that like as I navigate through my scene sort of naturally, in the ways that I've been doing it so far in class, that the camera is moving as well. So like if I switch to my camera view, the moment I start zooming in and out, we can see that the camera view stays where it is. The moment I start rotating, it takes me out of the camera altogether. So I need to redo that setting. So step one is I'm going to hit that little arrow that's poking out right to the side of the origin point up there. That brings up the side menu that we've also used before. And particularly, I want to be down in the View tab over on the right-hand side. So I hit the little tab, go down to View, and then specifically what I want to do is I want to hit this checkbox for Lock Camera to View. That, to me, gives us a pretty quick and useful ability in terms of, well, how we can navigate around. So I've locked my camera to View. Now if I go back into camera mode and rotate around, the camera's following that. If I zoom in and out, you can see that my camera is actually zooming out and allowing me to see more of it. And if I hold down Shift and kind of pan my view, the camera is enveloping all of that. So locking the camera to view is certainly something that's useful, especially for doing camera fly-throughs. For this particular demo, we can kind of, you can position your camera wherever you want. Like, you don't have to do exactly what I'm going to do. So maybe what I'm going to do here is just kind of position my camera right in the front, like this. And just another thing to pay attention to, just briefly, while I'm moving my camera around, if you pay attention over on the far right-hand panel, you're probably in this menu, but you can see that my camera's properties are changing. Those numbers are fluctuating quite a bit. Location and rotation are all changing as I move my mouse around. If you're not seeing that over on the right-hand side, you can always get to it. Number one, make sure the camera is actually selected as the object within your scene. Make sure it's highlighted, and make sure you're in the appropriate side menu. So I'm in the objects property tab right over here, so that I see the properties for the object I currently have selected, which is my camera. And again, just double checking, sure enough, when I move my camera around, my camera's object properties are also moving. So I'm going to get my camera relatively where I want it to begin, maybe right here. Paying attention to my timeline down at the bottom, you can see that my playhead is indeed on frame 1. And so what I'm going to do, since I'm at frame 1, and since my camera is positioned the way I want it to begin, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add keyframes to both location and rotation, because these are going to be the two things that are certainly going to change as time goes on. My camera is going to move through the scene, and it's not just going to like stay on rails. Like, it's probably going to rotate a little bit or something like that. And so I want to be able to make sure that I can animate both of those properties. So what I'll do, now that my camera is positioned on frame 1, how I want it to begin, I'm just going to right-click on any of those 3 location properties and choose Insert Keyframe, which will, of course, allow the program to remember my camera's location at this point in time. And then I'll just go down a smidge further and right-click and insert keyframes again for rotation. That way, the scene is also remembering not just where my camera is, but how my camera is oriented within the scene. It adds the diamond icon onto our timeline, which is familiar to us. And now what I could do is I could move my playhead to a later point in time. So I'm at frame 50 now, or whatever frame you want to be on. And what I'm going to do, now that my playhead has moved over a little way on the timeline, I should be able to reconfigure my camera's position and then eventually add some keyframes to remember that. So again, this is something that you could do however you want to. Lots of ways that you can navigate the camera. So maybe what I'm going to do is kind of scoot it off to the side. I'll kind of go into the scene a little bit by zooming. And maybe towards the end, I'll just rotate it slightly. All right, so this is now my camera's position. It's not in the front anymore. It's towards the back and kind of looking at it from the side. But that should give me a pretty decent animation. If there's anything goofy about it, we can amend things a little bit into it or fix things as we go. But so for a frame of reference, my camera is looking at something different 50 frames later within my project. Now what I need to do that I'm 50 frames later and my camera has changed, I'm just going to right click on my location and rotation properties again and add new keyframes. Just like before. And after doing that, as you may expect, I get, albeit simple, I get a camera fly through. The camera starts here and ends there. Simply by moving the camera to a different position at a different point in time and adding some keyframes. If it didn't work, try it again. Practice makes perfect. But that's generally the steps that we'll want to follow there. Of course, I'm scrubbing the timeline quickly, and so it looks like the animation is going fast. If I hit space, this is going to be the actual speed of it. If things are too quick or too slow, you can move these keyframes around, drag them to a later point in time if you want to. Now that animation takes a much lengthier period of time to complete. Or if things are too slow and you're not satisfied with that, you can take that second keyframe and move it closer, right? If those two keyframes are closer together, the animation will take place over a faster period of time than before. Oh. So again, that's the camera fly through in a nutshell. You're just animating the camera, right? I'm going to go out of camera view. That way I can just sort of free roam around my scene. It is important, like if you've locked your camera to your view, it is important to make sure that you're out of camera mode when you just want to like navigate around your scene again, because right now we've animated our camera, and so like if I forget to go out of camera mode and I'm just like, oh, now I want to like zoom in on something and change a little this or that, our camera animation will probably be broken too. So it's something you need to make sure that you do. Only be in camera mode really when you're trying to actually frame your shot for the camera. And once you're ready just to edit your project again, then just switch back into kind of the free roaming view. Cool. So I have this little array of cubes over here. And again, yes, your 3D scene is going to need a fly through, of course. But the other requirement in your project is that each of your 3 scenes actually has 3 different camera shots, right? So if we think about film and cinematography in general, right, like when we're watching a movie, right, like typically different shots and different cuts happen relatively fast, right? Like if there's a conversation between 2 people, there usually isn't just one shot, one static shot just sitting there with both people in frame as they talk back and forth at each other. Usually when there's a conversation in a TV show or a movie, when one character says something, there's a camera focused on that actor or actress. And then when the other person that they're having a conversation with says something, a different camera will cut to them, right? And then like if there's other stuff happening, like maybe they pull something out of their pocket or something like that, there'll be a shot of them taking that thing out of their pocket. We're all familiar with this, even if you've never internalized it or thought about it. But shots happen decently quick, and they allow us to create emphasis and show what's happening in a detailed manner. It's interesting to compare cinematography of today to cinematography from like the 1940s and the 1950s. In those decades, there weren't as many quick camera shots. They still happened, but it didn't happen as often. And a big reason for that is when film was emerging, film is acting. Well, film isn't acting, but movies have actors and they are acting. And in the early days of film-based movie production, the world they knew, the reference material they had to go off of, the discipline that they were all trained in, was really stage acting. And with stage acting, you do have 2 people on stage right next to each other talking. And obviously the people in the audience don't have like different cameras to like switch between. They're just in the audience watching. So early film didn't do as much with different camera cuts because they were used to stage-based performance in the decades that led up to it. As time has gone on and the cinematography has evolved, like obviously more use of camera work has become enmeshed in the discipline. So that's a little interesting tangent, but think about how you can kind of go through your scenes and show some different shots. Like here's the wide pan across the whole thing, but now here's like a detailed zoom going up to like one building or something like that. We can add extra cameras into our Blender environment, and we can cut between them to create different shots. What I'd like to do first, just to create some obvious differentiation, is I want to add a few additional objects into the scene. They could be anything. I'm going to add a little sphere over here. And then maybe, let's see, let's go back into mesh objects. And I'm going to add a little cylinder over there. So as we look at our scene, we have three distinct elements from one another. The array of cubes, the sphere, and a cylinder. Very, very fancy and detailed. But nonetheless, it'll be a clear indication of what we're looking at. So what I want to do after I've created these two other objects, I'd like to create some additional cameras as well. That way I can kind of jump between them. So just like before, we're going to go up to add, and then down a little ways, we have the ability to choose extra cameras. So I'm going to add 2 more cameras. Just add camera, and we should be good. Those cameras should be added at the origin point, so you'll just need to kind of scoot them around a little bit. It's okay if they're not aimed perfectly just yet, but generally speaking, try to get those 2 cameras into a rough position. So here are my 3. I've got the very first camera that I've already done an animation with. In fact, when I'm not in my camera view, we can actually see the camera animating through the shot. But then I have my other 2 cameras, one sort of over by the cylinder and one kind of over by the sphere, right? So now what I need to do is kind of get these 2 cameras set up the way that I want them to be set up. If I go back into my camera view, it's taking me back to my original camera, which maybe that's fine, but how do I set up my camera view for the other ones? What I'm going to do is I'm going to select one of these 2 cameras. Let's grab this one right here, the one that's supposed to be pointing at the sphere. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to View, Cameras, and then Set Active Object as Camera. So my second camera is selected, View, Camera, Set Active Camera. And the name of that alone should explain what's going to happen. This is going to be our new active camera within our scene. So if I set it as the active camera, it automatically takes me to it. If I go out of camera mode and then back into camera mode, it's now taking me to this new camera as opposed to the one that I've previously built. And now that I'm in this new camera view, I can go ahead and get this camera set up kind of where I want it to be. And now the next thing I'd want to do is sort of think about like when I want this camera to do its thing. So I'm actually going to leave camera mode for just a quick second. And I'm going to click on that first camera again, just for a frame of reference. So my first camera has a little animation that goes from frame 1 to about frame 40, right? So what I would probably want to do is have my second camera do something after that. So what I'm going to do for the second camera is get it positioned how I want to. And I'm going to go to about frame 50. Or if I wanted, I could start immediately on frame 40, but we'll give it a little bit of a buffer. I'm going to go to frame 50. And what I'm going to do is right click, both insert keyframes for rotation and location again, so that Blender is remembering my second camera's position at frame 50. And then, of course, just like last time, I'm just going to move my playhead to a slightly later point in time, maybe frame 80 or so. And I'm just going to move around my scene. So I'm looking at the sphere from a slightly different angle. And then once I've kind of gone to a different angle, once more, I'll just right click, insert keyframes. So the program remembers what I did. Now in this case, it got a little wonky halfway through. I kind of lost the sphere before it kind of zeroed back in. And what I could do is maybe go like halfway through that scene and just kind of reposition the object at the halfway point. And then at the halfway point, I can just go ahead and add a couple of extra keyframes in there to maybe help smooth that out. So I don't completely lose the object as I'm moving through the scene. So again, the problem I had was when I went from start to finish, I lost it. It kind of like went outside of the camera's field of view. So I just went to the halfway point, recentered that object a little bit within my camera, and then added some keyframes to kind of track that. Cool. Again, do whatever you want with your camera. Just have it do something a little different. And once you're kind of finished with that, we can sort of do the same thing for the third camera. So what I would want to do is I'd want to, go back out to my standard view, click once to select that camera, make sure the others are not selected. And then what I would do is I would go into view, cameras, and then set object as camera, or set active object as camera. I do that. And now just like a moment ago, this object, or this camera, is now my active camera. And also, just like before, I could use this as an opportunity to position the camera and aim it the way that I want. So maybe I'll start this camera just like that. And what I'll do is I'll do kind of like maybe I'll do like a sweep where it kind of comes in like that or something. So I'm on my new camera. I suppose, again, one quick thing that I should do if I forgot is try to remember when my second camera animation ended. That ended on frame 80. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll make sure I'm on frame 80. I'll go to my second camera, back into the camera view, and with that new camera selected, I will right-click, insert keyframes, and then maybe go a little bit further into the project, frame 110 or so. And on 110, I will just reposition my camera and add some keyframes. So once again, I have a camera shot that changes over time. So 3 different cameras, all with 3 different animations within my scene. And for the sake of this demo, if you don't have all 3 cameras moving around right now, that's fine. Like one of your cameras could just be like a still shot pointed at one object. The crux of this demo is that we have 3 cameras clearly focused on 3 different things. As long as you've done that, the animation is just extra, right? All right. So actually, I'm gonna goof that up. I didn't leave camera mode. So the next thing I want to do is apply some markers to my timeline. Again, I have 3 cameras. I'm going to jump back to the beginning here. And I could rename these cameras. The naming that I gave is okay, but the order that I added them in might get a little confusing, because what I'm predicting is I start with this middle one first and then maybe go over to this one and then that one. So I'm just going to rename them what they are. So the first one I'm going to rename as camera 1. The second one that I plan on using, I will just rename that. It kind of already is camera 2, but we're just going to formally say it's camera 2. And then the third one, I'm going to rename that as camera 3. So we've got camera 1, camera 2, and camera 3. Cool. Actually, this would probably be a good time to save also, since I haven't done that for a bit, just in case. Cool. So 3 cameras all doing their own thing. And if I kind of go back out to a non-camera view, we can see that each 3 of these animations happens in sequence, right? The first camera moves, then that second camera over on the right moves, followed by the third camera over on the left. So they're all doing their own thing. What I want to do next to make sure that Blender knows which camera to focus on and when, I need to assign some markers to my timeline. I mean, I know I've got 3 cameras and they're in order, but Blender doesn't know to switch the active camera for each one of those. And that's obviously important. You know, just like if you were a director for a film or a TV show, you know, you'd have your set, you would have multiple different cameras. And well, technically, maybe all 3 of those cameras are always filming and you can just sort of edit them in the end. But so, okay, maybe we'll use live television as a better example. You know, if there's something live, right? Like there still might be like a news crew or something like that. Or like, you know, if we think about like a sporting event, there's obviously tons of cameras around the venue. And there's a producer in a control room who's saying like, all right, cut to camera 5 now and have camera 3 queued up and I'll call for your transition in a few moments. That's kind of what we're doing here. You know, I've got 3 cameras that are all doing their thing. I just need to tell Blender when to go to those and when that becomes the active camera for our final shot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to frame 1 on my timeline. And I'm going to add a marker, this little marker icon right here. It says marker down at the bottom. So I'm going to click on marker and I'm going to choose add marker. And when you add a marker onto your timeline, it should apply it down at the bottom. It'll probably say something like F_01 or something like that. But I've got a marker at the bottom. I'm going to use that marker as the cue for my first camera. But before I do that, I'm going to add markers for my other 2 cameras. Camera 2 starts moving at frame 50. So I'm going to move my playhead over to frame 50. And what I'm going to do next is add a marker there as well. And then after I've added that second marker, I know that my third camera starts moving at frame 80. So I'm going to add, or I'm going to go to frame 80 with my playhead and then add a marker there as well. So I have 3 markers on my timeline, and each one of these markers I will use to switch to my different cameras. Give everyone a second to sort of add those. So now what I want to do is I want to add my cameras to my markers. And sometimes it's a little finicky, but it's usually pretty easy to do if we just kind of take it slow. If you notice when I kind of go back and forth on my timeline, when I get near a marker, it'll pop up for me. Or I can left click on them to highlight a particular marker. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my playhead back to frame 1. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on my first marker. So it's highlighted. When they're highlighted, they're kind of white as opposed to like a medium gray. So I'm back on frame 1. I've clicked once on my marker to highlight it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to also make sure that I have my first camera selected within my scene collection. So I'm on frame 1, I have the marker selected, and I have the camera selected. So everything that I need is currently ready to rock. What I'm going to do next, after I've taken care of all of that, is I'm going to go into the marker menu again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose the option bind camera to markers. So it knows which camera to bind because it's the camera I have selected. And it knows what marker to add the camera to because I have that marker selected. When you do that, if you pay attention to the name of your marker, it should now say whatever camera that is. So my marker no longer says F_01. My first marker says camera 1, which is great. Exactly what I need. So now if I repeat that process, if I move my playhead over to frame 50, if I click on the second marker so that it's highlighted, and click on my second camera So it's highlighted. I should be able to do the same thing again. So camera is highlighted, second marker is highlighted, and I'm on frame 50. I'll go back up to marker, bind camera to marker. And sure enough, that marker now says camera 2. One last time, I'm going to go to, for me, frame 80, which is when my third camera starts moving. So I'm on frame 80. I've selected the marker, and I've selected my third camera. Now, if I just go in and bind that camera to that marker, it should say camera 3. So my 3 markers now say camera 1, camera 2, and camera 3. Obviously, each one of these cameras is staggered. So lastly, really the last thing I need to test here is if I switch back into my camera mode, I could start off just by kind of scrubbing the timeline. You know, first I'm clearly in my first camera, and as I get to about frame 50, sure enough, it automatically cuts me to my second camera. And then on frame 80, it cuts me to my third camera. So I have one scene set up that toggles between all 3 cameras. I took the time to animate those cameras and get them doing what I want in the order that I wanted them to do it. And then on my timeline, I simply added some markers to call in those cameras so that they switch shots as that camera is starting its animation sequence. Hopefully that makes sense. Yeah. Ooh, you should be able just to delete the marker. And then if you add another marker, you can bind it to whatever you want to. Yeah, so the question is, how do you unbind? I would just say, like, you know, delete the marker altogether. Cool, so that creates our scene. And if yours isn't perfect, like if 2 of them are bound and one of them is being a little weird, it's all good for this next phase of the demo. As long as you have some camera motion and maybe a shift from one camera to another, you're in good shape. So what I'm gonna do next, again, this is all my camera view and they all look fine. I'm gonna save again real fast. And what I wanna do next is I wanna render this content. Now, in the past, it's been easy. We've gone up to the render menu and it's just, you know, we've saved an image, right? Like, easy. But this time we're dealing with video. And there are actually going to be a few settings that we need to change before this video, I would say, is ready to be rendered out. So what I need to do, there is a side menu option over in that right-hand panel. It looks like a little printer printing out an image. And if you hover over it, it'll be output properties. So we want that output properties submenu over on the side here. And what that output properties menu is going to do is, of course, give us a lot of choices in terms of, zoom, hold on a second. It's gonna give us a number of choices in terms of what this outputted file is going to be. So we can choose the resolution. We can say it's going to be 1920 by 1080, the aspect ratio, you know, 1:1, all that stuff. The frame start and the frame end. Actually, that's really important. Let's talk about that for a little bit. So if we look at the timeline right now, you know, I have an animation that goes from frame 1 and it's technically finished by about frame 110. Maybe what I'll do is I'll leave 10 extra frames at the end as a buffer. The problem is, if I look at my timeline actually goes to frame 250. And so if I were to render this right now as a video, you know, my project would be done rendering by frame 110, but it would still need to sit there and render out every single frame that takes place afterwards. And even though there's nothing changing, rendering each frame individually will still take a little while. Like, this is probably going to, if I left it the way it is, it would probably end up adding, even with a simple little animation, several extra minutes of render time. That's completely pointless. So what I want to do is I want to modify the ending of my scene. I could do that in the bottom right-hand corner of my timeline. I could just take that end scene and drop it down. We can see kind of the light gray bar is going away, and I can kind of zero that in on frame 120. Or if I don't want to do it down here, I could type it in, or I could type it in up here. But you know, we do want to take care of that. So now my timeline is much shorter. The other thing I could do in here is I can change the step value. What that's going to do is skip frames. That could be useful if you want to do kind of like a quick render. You know, you're like, okay, well, I kind of like the way this is looking. I want to see it in video format, but I don't want it to take like a really long time, I could change the step to be like 3 or 4. So it's only going to render one every 3 or 4 frames, which will obviously increase the speed in which your animation renders. It's going to look way more choppy, so it's not going to be good as a finished final product, but it is a good way to test your render as you're going. This is something I mentioned last time in class. We can absolutely change the frame rate as well. How many frames per second are going to go by. If you're used to using programs like After Effects works at 29.97 frames per second, so we can kind of jump it up there. And depending on what you choose as your frame rate, first of all, it's going to, visually make it seem as though your project is going faster or slower, right? Like if 30 frames is 1 second of time at 30 frames per second, like that's one thing. But if I change my frame rate to 60 frames per second, the first 30 frames, which was just a moment ago, a full second long animation, is now only going to be a half-second long animation. So you do need to consider those things. I know that we're talking about frame rate towards the end of this process, but in truth, frame rate should probably be one of the first things that you think about. Again, my sort of default mindset is 30 frames is 1 second, but you can leave it at the default 24 if you want to also. That's fine. Cool, so got my frame rate set up. What I need to do next is adjust some of my output settings for this. So the first thing I want to do is I want to choose where this rendered video is going to go. So I'm going to go to down here where it says output. It's probably going to be like TMP real fast. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit that folder, and I'm going to choose a different destination for my final render. That could be a folder on your computer. It could be your desktop, whatever you want. But go ahead and choose a location and hit accept. Here's the other thing that's really important. We need to change the file format. By default, when we're in this output menu over here, the output's going to be a PNG file, which is fine if you want an image. But if you want a video, clearly that's not going to do the trick. So in our case, since right now we do want a video, I'm going to change that format from PNG, and I'm going to change it to FFmpeg video, which is over on the far right-hand bottom side of things. So that's what I want, FFmpeg video. Once I do that, there's going to be a few other things I need to tinker with real quick. So after I change it to FFmpeg video, I'm going to click this encoding tab directly underneath and modify the video encoding a bit. The first thing I want to change under encoding is the container. It's going to be a Matryoshka video, which I've never even used. But under encoding and under container, what I want to do is I want to set the video file format to be MPEG-4, which is a pretty standard video file format. QuickTime is also pretty universal. You can do like OGV files or WebM files also if you need to, but an MPEG-4 video file type is arguably the most common that's out there. So I'm just going to, again, switch my container to MPEG-4. The video compression codec is set at H.264, which that default is going to be perfectly fine. It'll compress the video down to a nice file size without really goofing up the quality all that much. But if you're a film buff, like obviously you can tinker with these. You can use a different compression codec if you want to. The one thing to note, if you're using a different compression codec, not only will your file size potentially be a lot bigger, but sometimes video platforms and other applications don't work with certain codecs. So H.264 is, again, pretty darn common. So I would just leave it at that. So we changed it to an FMPEG video, MPEG-4, H.264. And again, you could bump up the quality if you want to also, very low, low, medium, high, lossless. Quality is going to affect your render times and your final video output. For right now, leaving it at medium is going to be perfectly fine. But tinkering with those different output qualities is certainly a fun little exercise to do outside of class. That way you can compare what your video looks like, what the same video looks like, just at different qualities. So once you've configured the video as such, now we can go into our render mode. When I click on the render menu at the top of my screen, this time I want to choose render animation as opposed to render image. And when I jump in there, what's of course going to happen is my project is going to begin rendering frame by frame. So this is a process that is completely variable. You can see for me, I'm getting about 1 frame every second or so. That's not too bad. I still have about 120 frames. It's going to take a little while, but we can see it's going reasonably fast. Things to factor in though, my model is, or my models are pretty simple. My lighting is simple. My materials are almost non-existent. So this is a very, very low impact render that I'm doing right now. If you have incredibly complex scenes with hyper-realistic lighting and complex particle effects and everything like that, rendering is something that can easily take hours, if not potentially even days, depending on the computer that you're using. So we're going to hit more of those hurdles as the semester goes on and as our animations become more complex. But I feel like you'll even notice it with this first major project. When you do these fly-throughs and you have these decently rendered scenes, they're going to take a few moments. So just keep all of that in mind. It also is a good idea to do some test renderings as you're working on your project. You know, the last thing I want to see happen is like, maybe you're pushing your project to the last minute and you hit render on it, I don't know, like a half hour before it's due, only to realize then that it's going to take like 3 hours to render your project. Like that puts you in a little bit of a pickle, right? So I would say do a couple of test renders early on. That way you know what to anticipate. And if you're like, yeah, my project's going to take like 4 hours to render, you know, maybe that's something you do right before you go to bed the day before it's due, or 2 days before it's due, or something like that. But anyway, my project should have rendered by now, and Blender should also have, let's see, automatically created that video file for me. I just have to wait for it to kind of finish doing its thing in the render mode. And as soon as that was done, if I jump back over from me to the desktop, this is where I told it to save this video to. I've got that file kind of hanging out, ready to go. I double click it, and sure enough, here is my scene. Very simple in design, but we can see it's definitely a video, and we can see that we definitely have all 3 of those camera shots that play through in our file. If you watch your video and you feel like it was too short, or like too quick, like some of these shots go relatively fast, again, I can go back into my scenes, I can rearrange my keyframe distance, I can move my markers around so the cameras come in at different times. Like I can adjust all of this. I just need to move around when things are happening. And then I can go ahead and render it again and compare the results and see if it's something I'm happier with. So practice will always make perfect. What I'd like everyone to do as an exercise related to camera motions is to go back through some of your previous lab assignments, the medieval house, you know, some of the mini city, the orthographic view that we did, and add a camera fly through for some of those. It doesn't have to be like 3 shots or anything. It could just be like a camera kind of rotating around it real quick, and just try rendering those out as videos. It's not an assignment that is going to be graded. It is simply an exercise in practicing with the camera. And because you already have several detailed and interesting scenes that you've created, to me, these are the perfect things to experiment with and just, again, further practice with the camera. That way, when it comes time to working on this big project, you're not like, crap, I forgot how to do that. You'll have had several different instances of experience with it. It never hurts to throw these on your design blog either, but again, it's not an assignment. If you don't get around to it, or if you do it but you don't post it, it's totally fine. So with that, as always, I lied. There's no free time in class to work on this now. We're done. It's 12:25. Class is over. But I do appreciate your attention. the class that meets in here afterwards, it's weird. They showed up one day and maybe he decided to go fully remote. I don't know. No one's waiting outside, so I might not have to sneak out immediately. But if they do start coming in, I might have to jet. If folks in person have questions, feel free to stick around. I'm happy to chat. If folks in Zoom have questions, same deal. But if no one has any questions, class is formally over. You can leave the classroom. You can leave Zoom. And I will catch you all next week in class. Cheers. Of course. See you later.
Hey, Ian, I have a question about the grading procedure for this class.
Yeah.
When are we going to get grades for assignments that we've completed the past couple weeks?
So I'll be starting to grade those this weekend. I'm not that this is an excuse at all. I'm not the world's best grader, but I don't want to leave everyone hanging in the dark for months on end. So I'll blast through our current labs as we move into this weekend.
Cool, thanks.
Yep. Got an in-person question, so let me just go jump over to that real quick. Because I'm going to step away from the computer momentarily. If anyone else in Zoom has questions, maybe just throw your name in chat, like, hey, I've got a question. That way when I jump back to the computer in a minute, I can kind of get through those. But I'll be right back in a second. Sorry, should be able to modify that into better settings. So yeah. Yes, I haven't been super consistent with them yet, but if you're on Canvas, usually what I will do, and again, I haven't for the last couple of days, but usually you'll see like lecture recording and then the lecture for that day. So I need to do Thursday of last week, Tuesday, and today. Okay. So I've got a few to add, but that's where you'll find them. You'll just find them on Canvas. And under the thing. Okay. Yep.
Also to animate, so I made there's a circle spiral to ball that I made today, but I wanted to animate the spiral because I can unspiral it and I wanted to animate the spiral. How do I do that? Because I was trying to figure it out, but I couldn't get it to.
I mean, depending on how you built it, within those modifiers, obviously you can adjust the slider for the spiral itself. You should be able to right click and add a keyframe on the spiral, and then go to a later point on the timeline, and then adjust that value to something else, and then add a keyframe there.
So I have to go keyframe by keyframe to make it so it's spiral.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, or at least start and finish, right? So you can say at the beginning there's no spiral, you add that keyframe, and then you go several frames later, increase the spiral value, and then add a keyframe, and then it should kind of show it spiraling within your animation.
Okay. I don't know what I was trying. I tried doing something, but it wouldn't do it. But I'll try again and with what you did today, and then see if it will. If not, if it won't, then it's fine.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thanks. Yep. All right. Lily, see a question from you. Let me read that real quick. Yeah. I will get the course recordings from Thursday of last week, Tuesday of this week, and today uploaded. I'll do that when I jump back over to my office in a half hour or so. Upload speeds on campus are really good, so I should do that here as opposed to at home. So I apologize that I'm not super quick about that, but I'll make sure that I get those posted.
No, you're totally fine, and I understand that it can take a long time to upload. Sometimes just wanted to touch in about that. Yeah.
The other issue is so Zoom records things. I don't know if you've ever done a recording in Zoom yourself, but so I'm hosting this Zoom obviously, and so when I stop the Zoom, that's when it's going to start saving the recording. And
okay.
So I mean, I guess what I could do is I could I guess I could stop. Let me see,